每天练习英语听、说、练，与我们一起提升你的语言技能。完成后，在我们的应用程式里多加练习。免费，连结在下方。开始练习吧。
Maya Cho loves to read poetry. Maya Cho loves to read poetry.
Maya Cho 热爱阅读诗。
Maya Cho loves to read poetry. Maya Cho loves to read poetry. Leo Park is a famous poet in our town. Leo Park is a famous poet in our town.
Leo Park 是我们镇上有名的诗人。
Leo Park is a famous poet in our town. Leo Park is a famous poet in our town. Nora Bell wrote a short poem today. Nora Bell wrote a short poem today.
Nora Bell 今天写了一首短诗。
Nora Bell wrote a short poem today. Nora Bell wrote a short poem today. Victor Lane reads a poem every night. Victor Lane reads a poem every night.
Victor Lane 每晚都读一首诗。
Victor Lane reads a poem every night. Victor Lane reads a poem every night. Iris Kim likes poems with rhyme. Iris Kim likes poems with rhyme.
Iris Kim 喜欢押韵的诗。
Iris Kim likes poems with rhyme. Iris Kim likes poems with rhyme. Felix Stone studies the rhythm of a poem. Felix Stone studies the rhythm of a poem.
Felix Stone 研究一首诗的节奏。
Felix Stone studies the rhythm of a poem. Felix Stone studies the rhythm of a poem. Lila Reed asks, who is your favorite poet? Lila Reed asks, who is your favorite poet?
Lila Reed 问，你最喜欢的诗人是谁？
Lila Reed asks, who is your favorite poet? Lila Reed asks, who is your favorite poet? Omar Cruz enjoys short haiku poems. Omar Cruz enjoys short haiku poems.
Omar Cruz 喜欢短短的排句。
Omar Cruz enjoys short haiku poems. Omar Cruz enjoys short haiku poems. Nina Vale carries a small poetry book. Nina Vale carries a small poetry book.
Nina Vale 带著一本小小的诗集。
Nina Vale carries a small poetry book. Nina Vale carries a small poetry book. Hugo West shares a poem with his class. Hugo West shares a poem with his class.
Hugo West 和他的班级分享一首诗。
Hugo West shares a poem with his class. Hugo West shares a poem with his class. Zara Moon quotes a line from a poem. Zara Moon quotes a line from a poem.
Zara Moon 引用诗中的一句。
Zara Moon quotes a line from a poem. Zara Moon quotes a line from a poem. Ethan Pike writes poems about nature. Ethan Pike writes poems about nature.
Ethan Pike 写关于自然的诗。
Ethan Pike writes poems about nature. Ethan Pike writes poems about nature. Ava Lynn listens to a poem at the library. Ava Lynn listens to a poem at the library.
Ava Lynn 在图书馆聆听一首诗。
Ava Lynn listens to a poem at the library. Ava Lynn listens to a poem at the library. Ben Hart says the poem feels sad. Ben Hart says the poem feels sad.
Ben Hart 说这首诗让人感到悲伤。
Ben Hart says the poem feels sad. Ben Hart says the poem feels sad. Kara Moss says this poet inspires her. Kara Moss says this poet inspires her.
Kara Moss 说这位诗人启发了她。
Kara Moss says this poet inspires her. Kara Moss says this poet inspires her. Diego Snow recites a poem from memory. Diego Snow recites a poem from memory.
Diego Snow 凭记忆背诵一首诗。
Diego Snow recites a poem from memory. Diego Snow recites a poem from memory. Eli Brooks claps after the poetry reading. Eli Brooks claps after the poetry reading.
Eli Brooks 在诗朗读会结束后鼓掌。
Eli Brooks claps after the poetry reading. Eli Brooks claps after the poetry reading. Fiona Dale prefers modern poems. Fiona Dale prefers modern poems.
Fiona Dale 比较喜欢现代诗。
Fiona Dale prefers modern poems. Fiona Dale prefers modern poems. Gabe York prefers classic poems. Gabe York prefers classic poems.
Gabe York 比较喜欢古典诗。
Gabe York prefers classic poems. Gabe York prefers classic poems. Hannah Frost asks for a poem recommendation. Hannah Frost asks for a poem recommendation.
Hannah Frost 请求推荐一首诗。
Hannah Frost asks for a poem recommendation. Hannah Frost asks for a poem recommendation. Ivan Hale thinks the poet uses strong images. Ivan Hale thinks the poet uses strong images.
Ivan Hale 觉得这位诗人的意象很强烈。
Ivan Hale thinks the poet uses strong images. Ivan Hale thinks the poet uses strong images. Jade Bloom marks her favorite verse. Jade Bloom marks her favorite verse.
Jade Bloom 标记她最喜欢的诗句。
Jade Bloom marks her favorite verse. Jade Bloom marks her favorite verse. Kai Rivers underlines a beautiful line. Kai Rivers underlines a beautiful line.
Kai Rivers 划线标出一句优美的诗句。
Kai Rivers underlines a beautiful line. Kai Rivers underlines a beautiful line. Lena Gray reads a poem aloud to friends. Lena Gray reads a poem aloud to friends.
Lena Gray 对朋友大声朗读一首诗。
Lena Gray reads a poem aloud to friends. Lena Gray reads a poem aloud to friends. Max Cole smiles at a funny poem. Max Cole smiles at a funny poem.
Max Cole 因一首有趣的诗而微笑。
Max Cole smiles at a funny poem. Max Cole smiles at a funny poem. Nia Price frowns at a dark poem. Nia Price frowns at a dark poem.
Nia Price 读到一首阴郁的诗时皱眉。
Nia Price frowns at a dark poem. Nia Price frowns at a dark poem. Owen Lake feels calm after the poem. Owen Lake feels calm after the poem.
Owen Lake 读完这首诗后感到平静。
Owen Lake feels calm after the poem. Owen Lake feels calm after the poem. Pia North asks, what is this poem about? Pia North asks, what is this poem about?
Pia North 问，这首诗是在写什么？
Pia North asks, what is this poem about? Pia North asks, what is this poem about? Quinn Ray explains the poem's theme. Quinn Ray explains the poem's theme.
Quinn Ray 解释这首诗的主题。
Quinn Ray explains the poem's theme. Quinn Ray explains the poem's theme. Rosa King points out a metaphor. Rosa King points out a metaphor.
Rosa King 指出一个隐喻。
Rosa King points out a metaphor. Rosa King points out a metaphor. Sam Vale finds a clear simile. Sam Vale finds a clear simile.
Sam Vale 找到一个清楚的明喻。
Sam Vale finds a clear simile. Sam Vale finds a clear simile. Tia Brooks notices the poem's tone. Tia Brooks notices the poem's tone.
Tia Brooks 注意到这首诗的语气。
Tia Brooks notices the poem's tone. Tia Brooks notices the poem's tone. Uli Reed talks about the poet's style. Uli Reed talks about the poet's style.
Uli Reed 谈论这位诗人的风格。
Uli Reed talks about the poet's style. Uli Reed talks about the poet's style. Vina Lake loves the sound of alliteration. Vina Lake loves the sound of alliteration.
Vina Lake 喜爱头韵的声音效果。
Vina Lake loves the sound of alliteration. Vina Lake loves the sound of alliteration. Wade Stone hears a steady meter. Wade Stone hears a steady meter.
Wade Stone 听见稳定的节奏。
Wade Stone hears a steady meter. Wade Stone hears a steady meter. Zena Park counts the syllables in a line. Zena Park counts the syllables in a line.
Zena Park 数一行中的音节数。
Zena Park counts the syllables in a line. Zena Park counts the syllables in a line. Yuri Lane checks the rhyme scheme. Yuri Lane checks the rhyme scheme.
Yuri Lane 检查押韵模式。
Yuri Lane checks the rhyme scheme. Yuri Lane checks the rhyme scheme. Zoe Hale reads the poem again. Zoe Hale reads the poem again.
Zoe Hale 又把这首诗读了一次。
Zoe Hale reads the poem again. Zoe Hale reads the poem again. Arlo Quinn writes a poem about love. Arlo Quinn writes a poem about love.
Arlo Quinn 写一首关于爱的诗。
Arlo Quinn writes a poem about love. Arlo Quinn writes a poem about love. Becca Moon writes a poem about rain. Becca Moon writes a poem about rain.
Becca Moon 写一首关于雨的诗。
Becca Moon writes a poem about rain. Becca Moon writes a poem about rain. Colby North writes a poem about hope. Colby North writes a poem about hope.
Colby North 写一首关于希望的诗。
Colby North writes a poem about hope. Colby North writes a poem about hope. Daria Snow writes a poem about fear. Daria Snow writes a poem about fear.
Daria Snow 写一首关于恐惧的诗。
Daria Snow writes a poem about fear. Daria Snow writes a poem about fear. Emil King edits his poem for clarity. Emil King edits his poem for clarity.
Emil King 为了让语义更清楚而修改他的诗。
Emil King edits his poem for clarity. Emil King edits his poem for clarity. Freya Moss edits her poem for rhythm. Freya Moss edits her poem for rhythm.
Freya Moss 为了节奏而修改他的诗。
Freya Moss edits her poem for rhythm. Freya Moss edits her poem for rhythm. Grant Cole edits his poem for rhyme. Grant Cole edits his poem for rhyme.
Grant Cole 为了押韵而修改他的诗。
Grant Cole edits his poem for rhyme. Grant Cole edits his poem for rhyme. Hanny Cruz edits her poem for word choice. Hanny Cruz edits her poem for word choice.
Hanny Cruz 为了用字而修改他的诗。
Hanny Cruz edits her poem for word choice. Hanny Cruz edits her poem for word choice. Ivo Pike shares his poem online. Ivo Pike shares his poem online.
Ivo Pike 在网络上分享他的诗。
Ivo Pike shares his poem online. Ivo Pike shares his poem online. Jada West shares her poem at school. Jada West shares her poem at school.
Jada West 在学校分享他的诗。
Jada West shares her poem at school. Jada West shares her poem at school. Kira Bloom enters a poetry contest. Kira Bloom enters a poetry contest.
Kira Bloom 报名参加诗歌比赛。
Kira Bloom enters a poetry contest. Kira Bloom enters a poetry contest. Levi Dale wins a small poetry prize. Levi Dale wins a small poetry prize.
Levi Dale 赢得一个小型的诗歌奖。
Levi Dale wins a small poetry prize. Levi Dale wins a small poetry prize. Mira York reads a poem to her sister. Mira York reads a poem to her sister.
Mira York 读一首诗给她的妹妹听。
Mira York reads a poem to her sister. Mira York reads a poem to her sister. Nico Gray reads a poem to his dog. Nico Gray reads a poem to his dog.
Nico Gray 读一首诗给他的狗听。
Nico Gray reads a poem to his dog. Nico Gray reads a poem to his dog. Orla Lynn listens to a poet on stage. Orla Lynn listens to a poet on stage.
Orla Lynn 聆听台上的一位诗人。
Orla Lynn listens to a poet on stage. Orla Lynn listens to a poet on stage. Pax Hart buys a new poetry book. Pax Hart buys a new poetry book.
Pax Hart 买了一本新的诗集。
Pax Hart buys a new poetry book. Pax Hart buys a new poetry book. Rena Frost borrows a poetry anthology. Rena Frost borrows a poetry anthology.
Rena Frost 借了一本诗选集。
Rena Frost borrows a poetry anthology. Rena Frost borrows a poetry anthology. Soren Lake visits a poetry website. Soren Lake visits a poetry website.
Soren Lake 造访一个诗歌网站。
Soren Lake visits a poetry website. Soren Lake visits a poetry website. Tala Reid follows a poet on social media. Tala Reid follows a poet on social media.
Tala Reid 在社群媒体上追踪一位诗人。
Tala Reid follows a poet on social media. Tala Reid follows a poet on social media. Uma Stone writes a poem in her journal. Uma Stone writes a poem in her journal.
Uma Stone 在她的日记里写了一首诗。
Uma Stone writes a poem in her journal. Uma Stone writes a poem in her journal. VocaHero writes a poem on a napkin. VocaHero writes a poem on a napkin.
VocaHero 在餐巾纸上写了一首诗。
VocaHero writes a poem on a napkin. VocaHero writes a poem on a napkin. Win Rivers writes a poem on the bus. Win Rivers writes a poem on the bus.
Win Rivers 在公车上写了一首诗。
Win Rivers writes a poem on the bus. Win Rivers writes a poem on the bus. Chavi Price joins a poetry club. Chavi Price joins a poetry club.
Chavi Price 加入诗社。
Chavi Price joins a poetry club. Chavi Price joins a poetry club. Yara Kim joins a poetry workshop. Yara Kim joins a poetry workshop.
Yara Kim 参加诗歌工作坊。
Yara Kim joins a poetry workshop. Yara Kim joins a poetry workshop. Zed Brooks joins a poetry slam. Zed Brooks joins a poetry slam.
Zed Brooks 参加诗擂台赛。
Zed Brooks joins a poetry slam. Zed Brooks joins a poetry slam. Aria North is a well-known poet. Aria North is a well-known poet.
Aria North 是一位知名诗人。
Aria North is a well-known poet. Aria North is a well-known poet. Zane Carter is a rising poet. Zane Carter is a rising poet.
Zane Carter 是一位新锐诗人。
Zane Carter is a rising poet. Zane Carter is a rising poet. Milo Ash is a brave new poet. Milo Ash is a brave new poet.
Milo Ash 是一位勇敢的新锐诗人。
Milo Ash is a brave new poet. Milo Ash is a brave new poet. Nova Bright reads poems on a podcast. Nova Bright reads poems on a podcast.
Nova Bright 在 podcast 上朗读诗。
Nova Bright reads poems on a podcast. Nova Bright reads poems on a podcast. Cleo Jade hosts a poetry night. Cleo Jade hosts a poetry night.
Cleo Jade 主持一场诗歌之夜。
Cleo Jade hosts a poetry night. Cleo Jade hosts a poetry night. Theo Vale organizes a poetry festival. Theo Vale organizes a poetry festival.
Theo Vale 筹办一个诗歌节。
Theo Vale organizes a poetry festival. Theo Vale organizes a poetry festival. Roxy Pike studies famous poets in class. Roxy Pike studies famous poets in class.
Roxy Pike 在课堂上研究著名诗人。
Roxy Pike studies famous poets in class. Roxy Pike studies famous poets in class. Dylan Cruz gives a talk about poets. Dylan Cruz gives a talk about poets.
Dylan Cruz 做一场关于诗人的演讲。
Dylan Cruz gives a talk about poets. Dylan Cruz gives a talk about poets. Miko Lane teaches a unit on poetry. Miko Lane teaches a unit on poetry.
Miko Lane 教一个关于诗的单元。
Miko Lane teaches a unit on poetry. Miko Lane teaches a unit on poetry. Tova Hart asks questions about a poem. Tova Hart asks questions about a poem.
Tova Hart 提出关于一首诗的问题。
Tova Hart asks questions about a poem. Tova Hart asks questions about a poem. Enzo Park explains why a poet is famous. Enzo Park explains why a poet is famous.
Enzo Park 解释为何一位诗人会出名。
Enzo Park explains why a poet is famous. Enzo Park explains why a poet is famous. Nori Bell compares two poems. Nori Bell compares two poems.
Nori Bell 比较两首诗。
Nori Bell compares two poems. Nori Bell compares two poems. Seema Gray compares two poets. Seema Gray compares two poets.
Seema Gray 比较两位诗人。
Seema Gray compares two poets. Seema Gray compares two poets. Juno Lake looks for symbols in the poem. Juno Lake looks for symbols in the poem.
Juno Lake 寻找诗中的象征。
Juno Lake looks for symbols in the poem. Juno Lake looks for symbols in the poem. Cato Reed finds personification in a line. Cato Reed finds personification in a line.
Cato Reed 在一行中找到拟人。
Cato Reed finds personification in a line. Cato Reed finds personification in a line. Lonnie Stone likes poems with strong images. Lonnie Stone likes poems with strong images.
Lonnie Stone 喜欢意象强烈的诗。
Lonnie Stone likes poems with strong images. Lonnie Stone likes poems with strong images. Remy Cole picks a poem for the group. Remy Cole picks a poem for the group.
Remy Cole 为小组挑选一首诗。
Remy Cole picks a poem for the group. Remy Cole picks a poem for the group. Zuri Moon reads a poem softly. Zuri Moon reads a poem softly.
Zuri Moon 轻声朗读一首诗。
Zuri Moon reads a poem softly. Zuri Moon reads a poem softly. Cora West reads a poem with energy. Cora West reads a poem with energy.
Cora West 充满活力地朗读一首诗。
Cora West reads a poem with energy. Cora West reads a poem with energy. Alec Kim gives a short poem review. Alec Kim gives a short poem review.
Alec Kim 写了一篇短篇诗评。
Alec Kim gives a short poem review. Alec Kim gives a short poem review. Dory York gives a long poem review. Dory York gives a long poem review.
Dory York 写了一篇长篇诗评。
Dory York gives a long poem review. Dory York gives a long poem review.
感谢观看，订阅我们的频道并开启通知，及时获取新视频，持续你的英语学习之旅。